can you tell us more about umbilical? What are we sitting under and within?
Thank you, Jennifer. We're sitting under this enormous suspended rope machine. I've been making rope machines for 25 years. I had a hunch 25 years ago that the rope had some kind of parallel or some analogy or metaphor to time, and I set about making that first piece, which is behind you, that wooden machine that I was at the Slade. And I've been on that journey ever since. I've made 7 rope machines in that time, and 2 of them suspended, and this is the second of the suspended rope machines. And this one came about in a slightly drunken conversation with the curator, the owner of this museum in Tasmania, who was very interested in the first suspended machine, and I kind of created a very different trajectory for my life, in which he was very keen on buying that one. And he said to him, and I said to him after a couple of glasses of wine, I said, well, what if I made a machine where all the arms are different lengths and all the spools are different thicknesses and all the gearing is aperiodic? And he was like, I want that one. And so the other one has been in storage ever since. And I was set on this task to build this one, which has taken 12 years. And I think part of the reason he's quite a mischievous collector. He didn't think that it was possible. So he's watched me from afar for 12 years struggling and trying to make this thing work. And to his surprise, we've actually proved that we could make ropes, and my sort of journey is over for now anyway, in that I've managed to prove that it actually does make this umbilical-like rope that in theory never repeats. So I was corrected actually, so I did a talk with Marcus de Sotoy for the launch of his book a few months ago, and I brought up this machine, and Marcus said actually the machine is repetitive, and I said, well how come? How can it be repetitive? And he looked at the numbers and all the ratios, and he says, this machine will repeat in 2.5 billion years. And I was like, well, okay, but for all intents and purposes, it is non-repetitive. And he was like, no, it's repetitive. So we had a very a very fun debate about that. But I think in 2.5 billion years, the sun will have consumed the Earth. So we kind of, I think in our lifetimes, it will never repeat. Or probably in the lifetime of the human race, it is non-repetitive. That was my starting point, and that's the journey to this point. It's I think that the machine, in terms of my intuition about being related to time, I think with this piece it really feels closer to something that is very analogous. So if you take our 9 planets and our 891 moons, there is no midnight in the solar system. There is no zero at which they all started like in an orrery where they all started at one point and moved around. They'll never come back to the same point and realign. And also we now know that our sun is traveling at astonishing speeds through the galaxy towards a black hole at the center of our galaxy. And so there is this helical path. All of the planets are on a helical path, just like these helical ropes. And they all are in a journey through the cosmos, which is essentially a non-repeating helical journey. And so the rope is feels very analogous to that. And every cross-section of this rope is unique.
Amazing. So this and many of your other works explore pretty epic subjects. So you just reeled a few off just there, like the origins of the universe, beginnings of time and space, even colliding black holes. Mm-hmm. So these works inhabit the very edges of human knowledge and understanding. Can you tell us why?
I guess I've always been drawn to these subjects. I loved physics and maths at school not because I was ever going to be a brilliant physicist or mathematician, but I loved it the way it chiseled away at what we believe to be real. And I think a lot of these works are about chiseling away at constructed realities, or we have a sort of physiological realities, which is to do with our senses, but we also have these very dominant constructive realities, which are very useful for governing our lives, but they're very distracting in terms of getting to the nub of what is real and trying to. And I think that's what I love about science, is that it really sort of challenges our preconceptions of what we believe to be real. And I was at the Science Museum, and this is where I first met Doron. Was in 2007. I was doing a residency there, and I came across Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage's work, and I was confronted by this machine, this spectacular mechanical machine that was built in the 1990s, and Doron was the builder of that machine. He managed to interpret all of Babbage's old drawings, and so for about 20 years, Doron has been like a huge hero of mine, and so I've been wanting to do a talk with you for many, many years. So we have incredible conversations over the years, and it was very inspiring with my Ada project work, but also Doron has effectively completely rewritten history in terms of Babbage's role in computing and Ada's role in computing. So again, but it's a really sort of fascinating moment in history where, had he succeeded, had he been believed, had he been funded, the computer age would have started 150 years before it did, or 100 years before it did. You correct me if I've said what I've said, if I've said something incorrect.
Technicalities in terms of who interpreted the drawings. In a sense, it was a challenge in the same way that your sponsor was a challenge. The question was, could it be built in time for Babbage's 100th anniversary, the centenary of his birth? And that was a challenge. It was 6 years that had been done that, how to do that. And I hadn't interpreted the drawings. The drawings had already been interpreted.
Right, okay.
And it was a question of, could it be done? And if it was done, would it work?
Yeah.
A similar kind of question.
Yeah, there was incredible. I mean, it's almost like I equate it to almost like choreographic nomenclature in the way he described movement. It was very beautiful, almost like hieroglyphs, to describe how all of these complex drivetrains would operate and how they would each cascade through each other, and there was a memory inside the machine. And you were telling me something extraordinary earlier, that if someone put in an equation that wasn't, tell the thing you were saying about an unsolvable equation, what would happen to them? So
I know this is out of sequence.
Totally
this
fine.
was in the context
sorry.
of the ode to difference engine, which is that machine over there. And I was simply intrigued by Conrad saying that it was built knowingly that it wouldn't work. Well, was that a question of principle, or was that a question of practice? I discovered that it could ravel yarn into rope, and it could unravel yarn into rope, but it couldn't recycle it so that we can do this continuously. So there are all sorts of metaphors there from all kinds of other traditions. To cross is not to recross is an old Buddhistic thing about rivers. And I'd only heard recently that it was a question of the unraveling, and he said if this machine would continue to run, it would run to destruction. Mm-hmm. And if it was built in foreknowledge of it running to destruction and not working, what was going on? You know, what was this demonstrating? Till when I heard about the question of it feeding back on itself. Firstly, Babbage spoke about the machine feeding its own tail, eating its own tail. So he would feed the thing back and eat it. He doesn't explain what he means there. But it turns out that, unless you've read only one chapter that I've written somewhere, you wouldn't know that actually the difference engine, that is a kind of hymn of praise to, if you like, or a stimulus or a catalyst. Conrad used the phrase failure of quest for knowledge. So what attracted him to Babbage, as I understand in one of the first instances, was this failure. He had this conception, a transcendent conception, that he was unable to realize. This was an example of failure. So he saw this, if you like, as almost an echo of it, until he mentioned this thing about it cannot feed its own input back in order to recreate what it started with. It turns out the difference in one of which that is a kind of tribute to, can be used as a computational measure, a systematic method of solution. So there are mathematical equations that have solutions. Babbage saw in 1822, when he built a trial piece, that if you cranked the handle and kept cranking the handle, if there was a solution to the equation, the machine would halt, which pre-echoes Turing's criterion of halting as a criterion of solution. If it had a solution in principle, the machine would halt. And it was a theoretical thing for Turing. Babbage said that if you continue to crank the handle, if there was a solution to the equation, and if there were multiple solutions to the equation, it would stop whenever it found a solution. Except if there's no solution, you would have to carry on turning ad infinitum it would run itself to destruction. So there's a stronger analogy. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Well, I didn't know about that, so it was amazing you telling me that, because this machine is built perfectly mechanically, but if you turn the handle, it crushes itself, because what it's trying to do is impossible. So I had no idea about this problem that. So with a digital computer now, if you put an equation into a digital computer and it's too vast to solve, it will crash the RAM in the computer. You have to turn it back on and thing. But with this one, it would mechanically destroy itself if you can't solve the equation. So it's really amazing. So it's really risky because you don't know what equations are. You don't know an equation is unsolvable until the machine blows up. So it's quite scary. But,
and this connection was only made when this thing was first started. It was when we met you, when you first ran this. And
well, I have the same with this one. I have the same anxiety. The whole thing is good. It's good. But it's working perfectly, so we're all safe. So it's fine.
So
sorry,
this brings me to
go off piste.
a question for Doron then. So previously we've talked about this.
Sorry,
am I echoing massively? Is it
can
okay?
you hear okay? Yeah. Yes, I would take the vibration. Yeah.
Okay. Previously we've talked about this idea of enigma. Do you want to say something more about that in relation to some of the works here?
Yes. I'm very struck by the kind of discourse that arises around Conrad's work. Conrad blows my mind, both him and his work. So let me say that up front. So one of the things that strikes me is that we try and frame what he's doing in times of scientific certainty. And when I read what was going to be in the exhibition, which includes the yarn, which 2001, I believe, and Conrad found that it had no obvious, it was not evident from its form what he did. And ultimately did not have a function. It did not have a utilitarian function. It was not useful for anything, but it's a kind of placeholder for an enigma. We don't know what this machine is, but it has resonances with other machines of its kind, weaving, spools, other things. When he said that, when I read that, which quite recently, it suddenly struck, I don't know if people are aware of Kafka's Odradek. Nope. Okay, Odradek is a bizarre, is a spool of thread, a star-shaped spool of thread, described in his book, The Care of the Family Man, I think 1930s. And he describes a spool with threads of different colors, which is old. The threads are fractured and broken. And it's presented as an enigma. Nobody knows what it's for. Nobody knows what its purpose is. Occasionally it gets up and runs around and speaks. It's not human. And this is a placeholder for enigma. And what's behind, I see behind all Conrad's work, is the question. Like, what is the meaning of things? What is the meaning of our experience? What is the meaning of consciousness? And the motive for Conrad keeping that, leaving it as a placeholder for some enigma, is precisely the Kafkaesque Odradek, which I was very curious to come this evening to find out if there were any resonances that Conrad was aware of.
Yeah, and I didn't know that reference, and I think that's a crucial thing in that it's really important that even though I come from a particular context in why I've made this machine, the important thing is that these complex systems and machines will always, like any scientific thing or artistic thing, people will always see something different in the object, in the art, in the artwork or the scientific equation, based on their neural pathways, their education, their religion, their culture, their gender, their sexuality, or their love, their trauma. Everyone will see something different in that thing, and so it's really important that there is that sort of death of the author kind of surrender. You surrender the work to allow that, and I'm far more interested in other people's interpretations than my own, and that they're just as valid or more valid. So I love especially within scientific communities, people interpreting the work, because for me that's really, really extraordinary. Those kinds of, when augmented minds kind of interpolate and see different things within it. But those also, my mother has written this wonderful text on the kind of, but she missed the Kafka one, which she'll be really pleased to hear about.
The Kafka one is, I'm aware of the time, but you're going to have to tell me. The Kafka one is used by David Link, a German artist. And very quickly, it's interesting, he put a time scale. The reason he needed a symbol of enigma, that is a machine, the purpose of which has been forgotten or lost. What he said was that if a machine is not used, and therefore to exercise the implicit and explicit knowledge in its function and its purpose, then it will be forgotten. Its purpose will be forgotten within about 50 years. And that's the only intellectual rationale I've ever come across for the process of conservation, that is restoration and reconstruction, restoration of old computers, working machines, anything at all, and reconstruction, creating machines that are perhaps in plan, but one of them, there's a continuity, that's a baton which has to be handed on each 50 years, or the machine becomes the yarn. And that's what the placeholder for.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, actually, both of you. So your work and practice is like super interdisciplinary, and kind of riffing off what Conrad was saying earlier about the need for multiplicity of perspectives and to kind of drive ideas and work forwards. Do both of you want to say a little bit more about that kind of approach in your own practice, and then Doron from your kind of previous history as well?
No, absolutely. So, I mean, I feel I've been kind of chiseling away at these ideas of trying to represent time for quite a long time. But I had this wonderful experience in Nottingham University 2 years ago, where I did a residency in the physics department there, and I was working with the scientist Silke van Vaarter and her team in the gravity lab, and they've set up a series of these experiments where they're trying to understand more about gravitational waves in the early universe, and they've set up these experiments where there's with vortexes. So they're looking at the turbulence around a vortex and they're scanning the surfaces in liquid helium, because apparently these are analogous to the gravitational waves around a black hole. And so I was really blown away by this use of the term analogy, because they're leading scientists with really, really large government grants to basically investigate all of this stuff. But like what I was amazed by was, like me, I was I who sort of feel like that is using the same kind of techniques and devices. I'm making a rope machine which is analogous to the sort of the planetary movements and to our perception of time, or even to the reality of the journey of our sun and our solar system through the galaxy. But similarly, they are using analogies, and I was very struck by that, and how imaginative they need to be, and just the overlay and the interdependency of art and science, and the need for artists to also try to visualize things that will never be seen, never be experienced, because they're either very, very way too small or very too large for us to ever experience. So two black holes merging is it's sort of, you get these things, like if you look at YouTube, you can see these things where there is this sort of sound where they kind of make this whoop, 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 and it kind of goes together, which sounds kind of cute, but actually, in fact, this is far from anything cute. It's this is billions and billions of stars and trillions of planets all colliding and vaporizing themselves in this catastrophic galactic collision, but it's represented as this little bloop as a sound wave, but it couldn't be further from that. And so, trying to find imaginative ways to transmogrify or represent these things visually, because we're visual linguistic people, and so is really, really, really important. That was a really massive turning point for me, this residency in Nottingham.
Amazing. And just to say,
and I was about to say that, and that also is these two works that I made in Nottingham are now at the Science Gallery in Bermondsey, opposite the Shard, and it opened a couple of weeks ago. And they are these two immersive installations, one called Ring Down, and the other one called The Blind Proliferation, which are Jen is the curator of the museum, and it's so it's on the show now till, when is it, 8th February?
Yeah, the end of February.
The end of February. Yeah.
So if you're interested in colliding black holes or parallel universes, do come to London Bridge before February. So just moving on to Doron, this interdisciplinary necessity Can you, so Doron, you are a giant in the history of computing and museum world. I'm curious to hear from you to hear a bit more about your life and how kind of interdisciplinary ways of thinking have shaped your career.
How long have we got? Very quickly. Some of my earliest memories are of making things. I've always had workshops and work with materials, almost regardless, not on the scale that Conrad does, I hasten to add. But that was something obviously innate. And there was some sense that materials and the physical interaction of them, particularly machines, mechanisms, mobile things, could instruct us about fundamental principles of the world, in some sense. I'm not saying any massively abstract sense. That there was some metaphor, some lesson to be learned from the way things interacted. I think they weren't where you thought they were. They were exactly where they were. If you're soldering a printed circuit board over here and something falls off the end and you didn't know about it, it's going to do so anyway, whether you think it's going to do it or not. Okay, very banal. And the thing that strikes me, one of Conrad's things, the tetrahedral structures that, I don't know if you're aware of them, but please interject if this is wrong. Conrad tried to make a closed, expected that a structure made of tetrahedrons would be enclosed. There would be no gaps in it. And he built these, made these, and there were gaps. There was a crack in it, you know. Leonard cones, that's where the light comes in. And so the question is, this wasn't because it's imperfectly manufactured. The more perfectly this is manufactured, the more exact that gap is. This thing did not enclose. There's some instruction there. Psychogeometry is a wonderful title for that book because it links perception, psychology, and geometry, which is somehow external. These are external properties of our objective properties of topology. So there's something instructive about what does that mean? You know, is it challenging our expectations of perfection in the world? We expected it to enclose, and we thought it was an imperfection in manufacture, perhaps, that it didn't. So if it's a question of, the original question was about analogies and something about what attracted me to artifacts, material culture primarily, that somehow knowledge of historical objects, they could tell us about the past, but also the respect in the metaphysical qualities of objects, where meaning transcends their utility, that meaning transcends what they were made for, meaning transcends their usefulness. And that, I think, is actually the catch net of almost everything Conrad does, if that's not...
The piece Doron is explaining very beautifully is this piece with 20 tetrahedrons, which are three-sided pyramids. You put them together and you expect them to form a ball of a perfect kind of polygon. But actually, in fact, it forms this crack around the edge, which is a failure of geometry. But for some reason, you would expect it to form this perfect ball, but it just doesn't. And no matter how many different ways you put it together, it has this, and it's called schism, the word, because it sort of implies this problem, there's something wrong or something. And so, and I think it's a perfect example of this kind of the diversity of interpretation. So a theologian would see that God is mischievous, and atheists would see that it proves there's no God. Simulation theorists say that it proves that we're living in a simulation. Some people say it proves we're not living in a simulation. It's a kind of, and some people said that Europe is, when Brexit was happening, said that Europe is screwed. Other people said that this is the hope that Europe can stay together. I don't know. There were people project meaning onto the failure, and that was what was, I think, really interesting about that work. And again, this importance of allowing the viewer to be the kind of the owner of the meaning is a really crucial thing with that piece.
And yes, and I think the other thing, it challenges the idea of perfectibility. You know, challenges the idea, well, why did we think it would close? You know, we're thinking that the world is mathematical and therefore perfectible in some way. And there are countless wonderful examples.
Again, Marcus de Soto in a lecture said that there is a space, there is a condition somewhere in the universe in which the curvature of space is such that there is no crack. So that's another really interesting thing about that work, is that it's to do with the particular conditions of space-time that mean that geometry doesn't work. But there are conditions in which the crack doesn't appear.
Yeah, I think this kind of brings us nicely onto this. So previously we've talked about this yearning or longing for pattern, or for Doron, like this tendency to kind of see patterns in collections of objects or anything, really. Can you say a bit about how that has affected your work?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the yearning for pattern is a really interesting one. There's a word that I discovered quite recently called apophenia. And that's a word that I really like talking about, because not many people heard this word, and a fellow artist introduced me to this word. And apophenia is seeing patterns when they're not there. But there's a really fine line in science and in art and in religion of this yearning for meaning, or for discovering the architecture of space or of the solar system. And the solar system is a really good example of that, of apophenia, if you like, because for thousands of years, theologians and mathematicians and astronomers have been trying to work out the secret architecture of our solar system. The Mayans created the first face of time, in which everything was laid out, but most societies have always ignored the 5¼ days and rounded it up to 360, because 360 is such a beautiful number with so many common denominators. It's got 12, it's got 6, it's got 4, 3, and 2, and 1. And you can divide your cake up, you'll slice your pizza into all these equal slices, and it works in terms of the months and all of these things. But there is this messy 5¼ And so most religions and most societies, in complete autonomy from each other, have created rituals around the winter solstice, which for the West is Christmas. And we have this, which in the West we call Crimbo, is between Christmas and New Year, where you forget what day of the week it is. And in Christian societies, you get quite drunk and forget whether it's a Wednesday or a Tuesday. And I still don't remember what day of the week it is between Christmas and New Year. It's a really effective way of kind of just resetting the year on the 1st of January. But it's across all religions, whether Muslim or very much there is this reset, and it's to do with this sort of willful ignoring of the fact that there were 365¼ and because there was this yearning for the grand design, the architecture, the symmetry, the beautiful order of everything, that there was somehow everything would realign at some moment and reset, or there was a beginning, and the yearning for a creator. It's very much there, but to the point where you're ignoring the facts. And that's what's amazing about it. It's really interesting for me, but to see, looking back at that. So but we now know that the solar system is a series of catastrophic events that led to this incredible, very unique planet to exist in this particular solar system, in this ocean of stars, as we orbit around this black hole.
Awesome. And Doron, from your perspective as someone who's spent decades in museum collections and museums, both here and elsewhere, that kind of search for pattern, how does that manifest in, I don't know, like how objects are collected by curators in museums, or how museum displays are put together?
I don't have anything really greatly informative to say about that, except that it's a kind of implicit approach to things. You're looking for order, you're looking for categorization, you're looking for taxonomies, you're looking for some way of structuring knowledge. And that is just inherent. It's less directed than the way in which Conrad refers to it and uses it. So it wasn't specifically that, it's physical artifacts. So patterns and patterns. Patterns become much more significant when we deal about abstract symbolic things, when we look at drawings, when we look at things to interpret them. And, Conrad mentioned what is called Babbage's mechanical notation. It's a quasi-mathematical language that nobody knows about. But it was used by his son and a few people in America. It's a hugely elaborate, sophisticated language, which is quasi-mathematical. Babbage was a mathematician, primarily. He was a polymath, but his first love was mathematics. And this is where he actually develops a language, a symbolic language, to describe both the position, the state of subdivision, the movement, the shape, the kind of motion of every object in anything at all. And he saw this as a universal language. So he saw this, you could pattern the world symbolically, universally. It includes the circulation of blood in birds and the depiction of movements in battle with the kinds of examples he gave. He used it to describe his machines very, it was decoded. We can decode it. He wrote some explanatory things, but none of them complete. And there I'd say one was looking for patterns. He was looking for a way of dealing with complexity. And in fact, the only second time, the next time, this was all done 1830s, 40s, 50s, the next time humanity had a need for a hardware description language, which was called at the time, was the 1970s, when the manufacture of electronic integrated circuits, chips, became too complex to hold all the detail in your mind at one time. So you needed some symbolic aid. So there was only from 1830s, 40s till 1975, there was no artifact created by a human that was so complex that it challenged one's ability either to understand or manage its detail. So there I'd say there was a thing of how do we impose perhaps too forceful a word, an order, a way of managing ideas, interactions, in a way that is systematic, and you can marshal and master it in a way so that you can optimize it, so that you can manage it and so on. So I'd say that's
yeah, and I think that reminds me that when another project we worked on closely was the Ada project, which was, I have the records on the counter over there, which are these 4 musical commissions we did with 4 female composers back in 2014. And Doron told me this most amazing thing about Ada, which is this, and I re-quote you all the time, but hopefully always crediting you, was the fact that Ada was the first person to, because Babbage built this mechanical machine, and it was all about processing number, but number would be put in and number would come out. And you should probably tell this about the quantity and entity, because it's so important.
She was the first person who articulated the idea that number could represent something other than quantity. So you could have the alphabet. The ASCII alphabet in computing, for those familiar with it, is just a series of numbers. They have an order. It's an arbitrary order, but they go increasingly, and they represent the letters of the alphabet. So you can now manipulate letters of the alphabet by manipulating number. Now, Lovelace was the first one to articulate that the power of computers was its ability to manipulate representations of the world contained in symbols which were numerical. So that's where, and she was the first one to articulate it, she's the first one to think it. Nobody else that I'm aware of has expressed it. Certainly Babbage didn't write it that way.
And the reason, so it was the springboard for this musical commissions, because she in her notes, and she touches on it once, she says, what if instead of putting numbers into this machine, we put music into the machine? It would be capable of creating the most complex compositions beyond the capacity of man. So it was a really, and then she never touched on again, but it's really, really important, and why I think you think she deserves such a place in history is this distinction between quantity and entity. So, which you've so beautifully told me in the past. So instead of it being apples and pears, it becomes data. So number represents more than just quantities of things, it represents information. And she's the first person in history to glimpse that
Yes.
possibility. She doesn't come back to it, but she glimpses it.
Yes. And just for the record, Conrad mentioned that she deserves everything she deserves in terms of her place in history, in terms of history of computing. But she was not the first programmer. Please, I don't usually advocate violence, but if you do hear somebody claiming to, please refer them to me. I'll send them the manuscripts signed by Babbage, signed by others, that shows Babbage programmed his machine 7 years before Ada was involved in it. So it's necessary for us to adulator. It's necessary to lionize it. But please, let's do it for the right reasons. And the reasons Conrad articulated are the very reasons. Yeah.
I mean, for those of you who don't know that story, it's an incredible period. Ada Lovelace was Lord Byron's daughter. And she was in these extraordinary salons in London, and had this, and there's lots of interpretations of her life and things, but she was an incredibly interesting historical figure, full of a lot of tragedy as well as genius. And Babbage similarly was a genius, but with lots of flaws that hindered his chances. But it's an extraordinary moment in history, not without a lot of parallels to now, in terms of the cusp of what we are on with AI and with computers and things. We are in a similar pivotal moment, which is something it's a very interesting thing to research if you guys are interested.
On that note, so previously to this discussion, we were talking about how we might apply principles that you have seen in some of these works and some of the principles you've been talking about now outside of this amazingly vast cavernous space. Did you want to say something about that?
About the...
So, both of you have operated across different disciplines for decades. You've been working to understand phenomena from the intricacies of machines to colliding black holes. Can you think of any links or threads you can pull out in relation to our audience here and how they might take some of the concepts or principles embodied in these works into real life today?
I can try to, I think that the purpose of these things is for it to get, I think I've been trying to understand time, like many of us do on different levels. And I think we are all governed, and we all have this very effective index of time, which is the clock, the 24-hour clock, which is a very effective constructed reality that governs our lives. But actually, in fact, it's very, very distracting to understanding what time really is. So I think that this machine tries to explore time on a level where there is no index or there's no repetition. It has cycles within cycles, which is more akin to our solar system and our galaxy, which I've already talked about. I think I was one thing that I was researching before this talk, which I think puts things in perspective and hopefully doesn't make us feel too small, but it just shows how fascinating that we can be aware of these things, is that while the sun takes 230 million years to orbit around the galaxy, the sun is only 20 years old. So in solar years, the sun is only 20 years old, and the sun will only live to the age of 28 by the time it burns out. But those years are 230 million Earth years each. So but in the grand scheme of things, the sun, in all its splendor and all its glory and size and astonishing mass, is such a tiny pinprick in this ocean of stars, and even bigger kind of trillions of planets that are swirling around this plug hole in this tiny galaxy, of which there are 10 trillion galaxies in the solar system. So all of this stuff has changed 10x in the last 10 years. Our understanding of the universe 10, 20 years is that the amount of stars apparently has increased, and the amount of galaxies has increased 10 times in the last 20 years, 10 years, I think, in terms of the amount of knowledge that we're gaining about the universe. And I think that in our life, where we may live in the sort of like to quote the Tale of Two Cities, the worst of times, but the best of times. It's the most interesting of times. And I think with quantum mechanics, with the show that you're doing, the things that we are going to discover in the next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be so breathtaking in terms of what we what we realize the world or the universe to be or the reality to be. I mean, some of the implications of even the slit, the wave particle experiment, the double slit experiment, the sort of information that implies that when you monitor an electron coming through a slit that forms a wave pattern, but the minute you observe it, the pattern changes retrospectively. So it goes back in time and changes itself. So that, which is the most extraordinary implication of what that means, is just totally jaw-dropping in terms of, is it a simulation? Are we, I mean, just, there are so many, I mean, anyway, that's why I love science. I yearn to discover more, because it gives such sort of, it's just breathtaking, the implications of these discoveries.
Yes, we do one of two things, is talk about this machine in time and the other machines, or talk on where we locate Conrad's work in general in relation to our understanding of the world. And the thing that struck me firstly about the umbilicus is the distinctness of its ingredients. So firstly, it goes back indefinitely, and as Marina Warner's, the panel on the wall from Conrad's mum, which he, it sounds disrespectful to refer to in this way, which is a celebrated thinker and writer, but I'll take that liberty. That it's not just a single umbilicus that gets severed after birth. It goes back and back and back and back and back. And the point about these is that the issue of non-repeatability and the distinctness of the elements in it. And we're not saying anything about the nature of those elements. Are they psychological? Is it DNA? Is it whatever? Is it, whatever it is? And the thing about where I see Conrad's work is that behind it there's always a question. What might this mean? And what might sense and meaning it help us find about what there is behind, as it were, the veil of what's comprehensible? And so one thing is the idea of one's complete, unique and distinctness. If there's repetition, one would eventually expect that there would be another human that was indistinguishable from one of us. Okay, that's not a realistic fear, but the principle of it is terribly good. The one is the idea of mechanization of repetition and something biological. So one of the things that strikes me about it is we don't know. It's as though the life we experience and all the rest of it is a mapping from another dimension, other dimensions. I don't mean to be have any spiritual dimension, it could well be. But other dimensions, physical dimensions that are beyond our perception, that is beyond our ability to experience them. And where I see this, together with many of other Conrad's inquiries, metaphysical objects, is at that border of what it is that are objects of experience that we can know through our senses. And this sort of hints, it's a kind of springboard or a platform or a resonance of what might else there be, what are the hidden structures or the unseen structures that are out there that are beyond our senses. And this sort of helps us through metaphor to say what they might be, to provide our own notions about what they might be. To me, it's distinctness, individual distinctness. So it strikes me about that, and the indefiniteness of time. Also, the idea of a perturbation of a celestial body might only have a manifestation millions of years later, and yet contained in our experience, in our linear experience, subjectively linear experience, of what's going on. And there are absolute analogies in Difference Engine 1, astoundingly. Babbage uses feed forward and feed back. He can take numbers from one column in the machine, feed it forward to a part of the machine that the calculation hasn't yet reached. So you've got something feeding something ahead of time, influencing absolute analogies to the analogy of the celestial body disturbing the. So it's parallels of those kind which help us think about actually what might they be. So really it's to do with to reinstate myth as a companion to the certainties that science promises And I'm absolutely in agreement with Conrad that science is actually the tool of that exploration, and that alongside it is science has not dispelled myths, because quantum mechanics, it's still debated now, how many decades later, whether anyone actually understands it or whether it's actually comprehensible at all. And that's where I'd like to position all Conrad's sculptures, in that interface, at that border between what might be and what is.
But I think that because they're so beyond our experience or our ken or our, as in these mortal coils, with our five senses, to understand these things, it's just so important to have metaphor and allegory and analogy, because and in myth and these ways of trying to imagine these things that we'll never glimpse the mechanism. We just have to dream of it, and we have to try and embody it in something visceral for us to understand.
Brilliant. I'm going to turn to the audience now. Dear audience, you're listening very intently. I wonder if any of you might have any questions for either Conrad or Doron, or both.
Sure.
I'm just really intrigued by, it's more of a comment really. We've spoken a lot about like the cosmic and the kind of world beyond our world, but the word umbilical it feels very felt and very intimate, and also like this singular spotlit cup here is very powerful, and just it'd be really interesting to hear about the relationship between that internal, intimate world and then the like cosmic.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. I mean, it's sometimes I do get carried away with all the cosmic stuff, and so but there is this visceral, this thing where is this sort of, it's like this, it's very kind of like a huge spider above us with this, and the piece has got this, obviously an association visually with an umbilical cord because of its like quite sinewy kind of way that it sort of double back, and it does have an appearance, and we've kept a sort of dominant red within the structures. There are 5 colors, but we've kept a sort of slight dominance of the red, so it has a kind of, and the blues also feel like muscular, or there's a sense of it being quite corporal in its feel. But again, that just what you alluded to, this idea of the umbilicus, it isn't just, we all had one. And so we all, and obviously created by the mother, but both boys and girls are fed through it. So it's a kind of universal, because there's a sort of universal ownership over of that thing. And there is this, again, which my mum was describing very, very poetically, Marina Warner, this idea of the womb within the womb within the womb, and that recession in time of us all journeying through. And if you are to sort of get rid of the linearity of time, there is just this Russian doll of wombs within wombs within wombs within wombs that go back to Adam and Eve, or to wherever you want to take it. But it's wombs with, it's a series of these womb chambers that recede backwards forever. And so that's another way of, that kind of way of envisioning us as a species, is through these womb chambers that recede into each other.
I think as well, like, you could take it down to the level of materiality in the elements, and have you heard the saying that we are all stardust, because the elements that make up our bodies, carbon, hydrogen, I'm going to like lose my path on the periodic table here, can find their origins in the stars. And so I think that's really powerful, because at the beginning when I was trying to make that link through this umbilical cord all the way back to the origins of our solar system, that's a really beautiful analogy to think about how we as humans are all interconnected to each other, but also the kind of like vast outer reaches of space.
There was a question back there.
Helen.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah, speak up so I can't hear you, sorry.
I'm interested to hear why it's important for it to function. I think you had a really nice piece at the start talking about the piece behind us, about it's kind of the stillness. And the whole piece, the stillness. To what extent does it need to physically work, as well as not only in theory function as a machine, but you said it took 12 years to make it work. Why was it important for you that it actually did?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I wish I didn't need to make it work. I mean, I've included 2 previous works that are static, that I didn't want to have more than one moving in the room. So I felt that I made this piece in 2007, and I previously made works that were these quite janky machines that were on the edge of collapse. And I made this work sincerely knowing that it wouldn't work and as a static piece. But no one believed me when I showed it, and everyone would say, oh, you just couldn't get it to work. So therefore I was a bit frustrated with it. So I had I had felt a little bit misunderstood with this piece because everyone was just like, you couldn't get it to work. But I did honestly conceive it as static work, so I thought it would be good to re-show it again with a work, the piece that does function very well at doing what it's meant to do, to give that one a sort of more of a kind of authority as a work that is conceived as a failure. But you're right that it's about the potential of movement is very much. I mean, I often when a static object is sometimes more dynamic than a moving one, if it's already being activated by the sun and by your movement around it, you don't need movement all the time. It can be overkill. So it's not a necessary part of the work. But I think with this particular commission in its permanence, it's worth mentioning this is going to go to Mona in Tasmania, which is this amazing museum in Hobart, just outside of Hobart. And it's going to be in a permanent atrium, and it'll run 24/7 for as long as it carries on going. It's designed to run for 50 years, and you change the spool once a year, and the rope will continue to grow in this sort of ropery underneath, will become a soft play area where kids just jump and play in it, but it will grow over the decades. It'll have a very much a climatic kind of interpretation. It's like a chaotic system that's very sort of vulnerable. So it's got our relationship to climate, how we're affecting climate. There's this sense of cause and effect, a lag of between action and consequence. So you've got a snarl in the rope or a break in the rope, and you see this and you look at this and you think, God, what happened here? And then you realize, oh my God, that happened 3 weeks ago. It happened when that spool got caught on that one and then it came down, but you don't realize, it doesn't manifest itself until it comes down to the bottom. So there's this sense of delay and lag, which, like with what we're experiencing now with our weather systems, like we have these tornadoes or hurricanes or flooding, and we don't know what's causing them. We know what's causing them, but how far back does it go? Was this from 100 years ago? We see nothing yet. We don't really understand how long things take to manifest themselves in such a complex system. But this machine has the future, the present, and the past in a sort of flawed model of time. But it's somehow, I think, useful in trying to sort of get your head around some ideas in a different way.
Brilliant, thank you. Any other questions? Hello.
What are all your thoughts, feelings, or like relationships with randomness?
Do you want to repeat the question?
Well, do you want to answer the random? And what are your thoughts and feelings about randomness?
I was struck when the words random and chaos were used in the description of these things, because something is truly random you could say absolutely nothing about. And then, it's not stochastic, it's not ordered in some way. Do you have a particular reference to it? Is there something that was called random that you're concerned mightn't be?
I was wondering what you felt about it.
What?
What you felt about it.
About the occurrence of it, where its place is?
I didn't think that far ahead.
While Conrad answers that, I'll give that some thought.
I think things that there was a phrase someone told me recently that something chaotic is very close to being order and chaos are very kind of close to each other. I mean, the sun rises and our our weather patterns, our work within certain parameters, and we expect certain things. Obviously, you get outliers some days, and it rains more heavily than normal, or there's higher winds. But the system is chaotic, and yet within those constraints, it's quite predictable. We don't know what's going to happen on a sort of macro level, but we know basically all the range of outcomes within those scenarios. So I think that sometimes chaos is quite misunderstood in terms of if you think, would you say, do you think chaos and randomness are the same, or?
It was, I don't know.
I think, what's the difference between chaos and randomness? Is there such a thing, or they're quite similar, aren't they? Or is chaos and randomness?
I would say randomness has the context of occurrence and probability, whereas chaos is somehow systemic.
It's a chaos. You can have many random events, or results which lead to a chaotic system, but you can't. But randomness, you can't have a random system, because I think you can have. So I think, chaos has to be a systemic thing which has many inputs that create unpredictability. Whereas a random thing is just like when you throw a dice. You can't.
I think it's to do with the occurrence and specificity, something specific thing. It either is or isn't random. Whereas I would say chaotic is a description of a system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? In the front row, and then the person at the back.
Yes, I was thinking with this stuff, you're dealing with obviously very big concepts, and you're dealing with also this kind of engineering-wise, it's very tricky to do, it's very massive to understand how to make something like this. How does it feel for you, like as an individual, when you're dealing with very big concepts and very big, like practical things? How does that feel in the process of making these things?
Well, it goes full spectrum, so it's like sort of joyous at some moments and very disheartening on other moments. Building mechanical suspended sculptures above people's heads that have to last 50 years is not easy, and it's very I don't know, I'm drawn to it like I'm off to a flame, these kind of challenges, but it's been immensely challenging. It's 12 years, a long time for any project, and it's 2 years longer than the Odyssey. So it's kind of and I have a small team of people, so the retention of knowledge on this project has been a huge problem when people leave the studio and trying to pass on the huge amount of information to new people. And so I've been very reliant on a very small number of people's loyalty to get this over the line, which I'm incredibly grateful for. So my structural engineers, my mechanical engineers, and Rob in the studio, and some people who really just wanted to get it done, because with something like this, it was 12 years old, the money ran out a long time ago. So it's kind of getting that loyalty is incredibly important to sort of getting it finished. And as you've seen on the time-lapse video over there, I delivered everything here on my trailer with my family car. It was like 45 trailer loads. We had to build the tower to suspend it from, and it's just escalated into this mammoth task that still hasn't ended. It's still got to make its way to Tasmania and install it there. So the Odyssey continues.
Chapter 2.
Like any great Odyssey, it's not over. It'll never end.
Thank you. And there was the last question at the back. Hello.
Hi, thank you very much for making this incredible for me. One question would be for us to hear more about it. Obviously, there are so many layers. It's about the scale and the fact that, and if there's some thought about like building and the fact that we're all inside this machine, and the fact that like we're all observing something that is evolved over time, and so because I'm easier as a completely different experience here, be able to watch this versus maybe like smaller parts that like smaller and harder. So like, I was wondering if the selection of scale was something you wanted to share more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these earlier works are very much about the human body, and that they're exactly, the eye lines are at the midpoint of the machines, and they're very much about using the body as reference. This one is obviously on a much larger scale, and it's slightly being dictated by the museum in Tasmania that wanted it of a certain size. But there are certain key things that the rope, the focal point of the rope. This room actually is extraordinarily. It's a meter too short for the machine, so it's an enormous room. But the focal point of the rope is designed to be at exactly eye height. So there are all these human factors involved. The machine is based on the geometry of a sphere. So all the spools, wherever they are in their orbit, that never repeats. They're always equidistant from the focal point. So they never go slack or too tight, depending on where they are. They travel around this spherical plane. And so the diameter of that plane and the thing was all around, it was constrained around the room and around the experience of the person seeing this apex of this focal point, which I guess is the analogy as that is the present, where all the strings coalesce into this shared moment. I mean, it's obviously a flawed metaphor, it's a flawed model of time, but it's useful to an extent. But those sorts of things about the body is still incredibly important. In the museum, I'm hoping, if it ever gets built, there'll be a balcony above which you can experience the rope and the machine much closer, so you can see the intricacies of the mechanism, and then come down a ramp all the way to the bottom to this level, and then below it will be the ropery, because over decades the rope will get a significant amount of rope, which, like an ice core in the Antarctic, is all unique. So you can cut the rope, and every section is a unique section to which corresponds to the configuration of the spools at that moment.
Amazing. Thank you. We are actually out of time now, but our speakers will be around. So if you had a question that you didn't have a chance to ask, please do come and chat to them. And thank you so much for being here. If you haven't already, be sure to check out a few more of Conrad's works currently on show at the Science Gallery London in an exhibition called Quantum Untangled, which is on until the end of February. And please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers, Conrad and Doron. Thank you.